The future of psychedelics is sobriety. And I don't mean abstinence, but I mean taking a very sober approach to how we work with these substances.
You're on Team Human, Conscious Intervention in the Machine. An opportunity to reclaim our sacred practices, push back against the consumptive power of industry, and reclaim both community and consciousness on behalf of every living thing. I'm Douglas Rushkoff, and I'm on Team Human. Playing for Team Human today, my favorite advocate for purpose-built ecosystems and psychedelics, Liana Sananda Gillooly. Welcome to Team Human. I've been hoping to have Liana Sananda Gillooly on the show for a long time. She's been a leading voice for the alignment of purpose and impact in fields of change. She worked for a long while on drug policy reform and advocacy, including 6 years at MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. She's known best, I think, for helping to expand the landscape of psychedelic medicines, while also keeping people, companies, and organizations accountable to their constituencies and purpose. She's been extending her own practice beyond psychedelics to all sorts of organizations working to reimagine what it means to heal.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But
All
let's
right.
start. Let's start, if we can, with psychedelics and the state of things, kind of as you see it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the MAPS thing just happened again. Their big, whatever that is, the
Psychedelic Science Conference. Yeah, 9,000 people, or I guess just shy of 9,000 people this year.
And that was a conference, I mean, that I was getting scared of, that it was going to become like the South by Southwest of psychedelics and be all mean and commercial and bro and whatever. But how does MAPS and that conference kind of trace the state of psychedelics?
Yeah, well, perhaps it can help to also learn a little bit of my own personal history of MAPS, which has been a 15-year relationship with the organization since I first attended the MAPS Psychedelic Science Conference in San Jose in 2010, which had a few hundred people there. It was all scientists, researchers from around the world, and people who had taken interest in pursuing academically the study of psychedelics, which was back in 2010, extremely taboo, very small community, and yet felt very radical to show up into that space as a 22-year-old who had a strong affinity for mushrooms and LSD and these types of experiences, and didn't realize that there was a community of practice that was pursuing the expansion of our understanding and skillful use of working with these molecules, especially to treat mental health conditions. So this arc for me has been really starting from there, a 15-year arc.
It's wild, too, because when I was when I was the age you were going to that conference, it was for me in like 1989 or something, going to the 50th anniversary of the discovery of LSD by Hoffman. And it was at this Masonic Center in LA, and it was like Terence McKenna's there, Timothy Leary's there. But it was, even to go to that, which was non-scientific, was itself this weird, radical underground. Are there cops watching?
Right, exactly. You know? So this arc with MAPS has been, I mean, so much has developed. In 2023, the conference had just shy of 13,000 people there. And so that, I think, was a moment where there was a ton of excitement. MAPS and the MDMMA program that was put forward at that point by the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation was completing its final phase 3 study and submitting to the FDA for approval, and had all the clear signals from doing a special protocol assessment, receiving breakthrough designation as a treatment, having incredibly solid, statistically significant outcomes, having a good safety profile. We were well on the way to approval. And so what that meant is that this entire industry was standing itself up, seeing the writing on the wall and preparing for the business opportunities that would become available.
Right, because like MAPS have been doing years of all these studies with like therapists working with people and ecstasy and safety and this and that, all the stuff you have to do like when you get a regular drug approved.
Oh yeah.
So it was going to get...
And more.
Right, and more, because it was a weird one.
Yes.
But then, like, the idea is once you get approved, then partly there's a lot of good people, but then partly there's also just all the pharmaceutical companies or all those kind of people who want to then go into business.
Well, and I think the thing to remember is that the MDMA therapy program, which is now in year 20, right, really kicked off in 2005, is kind of the tip of the spear. And so what you have is behind it, you have hundreds of other applications for different psychedelics, for different indications coming through the FDA. So really what this was precedent setting. It was paradigm setting, especially for the combination of psychedelic assisted therapy, this combination drug plus therapy treatment protocol. And so that was really, laying the groundwork. And there was this idea that if MAPS could set that stage, that all these other efforts would then have a clear path to achieve their goals. And so then you had a lot of interest from pharma companies, from biotech drug developers, from just, interested people, many of them good people who wanted to be part of something, an interesting movement around healing, many people who had experienced healing themselves and wanted to help others, achieve the same results. Which we should get into the universalizing tendency of the psychonaut, right? Something that worked for me must work for everyone, right? And so you have a lot of activity and interest, and it kind of 2023 was this super energized, euphoric, almost very frothy, kind of a lot of capital moving around, a lot of startups, all taking shape, very kind of commercial event, which was really challenging for me I was one of the producers of that conference. And it was a really kind of, for lack of a better term, trippy experience to be inside of something that had just mushroomed and ballooned into this big thing. So what we saw this year, because we did not end up getting FDA approval.
Which was a big story. It
massive
was
story.
Right.
Yeah.
And there was all these different reasons, right?
Yes.
Some of the reasons that it's just too weird, or that there was the fact that there was psychotherapy and a substance that they didn't know. What are we judging here? They hadn't approved that. But then there were attacks from the other side too, which we don't have to
Well, actually,
name
there were
names.
actually attacks from inside of our own movement were the ones that harmed us the most. But for me, I think my perspective on it is that the FDA had done a special protocol assessment some years before. They had gone through and analyzed the protocol and said, this is something we can approve. From that day, they then had stood up an internal team to really analyze the new drug applications or just the applications for people interested in studying psychedelics. And basically they came back years later and said, look, when we did this special protocol assessment, we didn't know what we know now. And the FDA is a hyper-conservative organization with the blood of the opiate epidemic on their hands. And they know that any sort of precedent being set with MDMA therapy is going to open up the floodgates. So in my perspective, they just made a hyper-conservative move.
Right, because they were scared of children buying acid at bodegas and passing out on the street or whatever.
Well, and just are these drugs truly addictive? I mean, we have a lot of evidence that demonstrates that they are not, right? But there was
Except maybe ketamine.
Well, ketamine, which is a dissociative and not a classic psychedelic.
Yeah.
It's a different class of drugs and is already approved. So,
and it's maybe the worst. Well, no, I wouldn't say worst one, but it's got features that we already know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I have a big bone to pick with ketamine inside of the space, which is
with the molecule itself.
It's just the use in the culture, right?
Yeah.
And this maturity of the culture. And I think one thing I've witnessed over time is, a lot less people are consuming alcohol, and instead they're microdosing or they're taking a bit of ketamine, and they're saying it's healthier, right? And so there's also a thing where people believe that they're healing themselves through the regular use of ketamine. And what ends up happening is at a certain point, it can flip. And you might be treating the symptoms of your depression, but at a certain point, the overuse of ketamine can start to be the cause of persistent depression.
Right.
And this kind of flip can happen really subtly. And I have seen people just become extremely dependent on ketamine and ruin their lives and die. I've had my best friend died after becoming addicted to ketamine. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever gone through. But for me, it's just been this important recognition. I feel grateful for these hard experiences because I feel responsible as a communicator about this movement and these molecules to name the dangers that are associated, the shadow that's associated. I think in the exuberance of all the possibility and kind of the hype bubble around psychedelics, that there hasn't always been a responsible communication about the shadow side of these substances.
Right. I mean, in the shadow side, I mean, going back to even that moment when many, for lack of a better word, investors were licking their lips, whether they liked psychedelics personally or not. I mean, it's funny. I wrote a whole play about it, and then I saw 10 seconds in the show Billionaires that Billions, whatever, that captured the entire play I had written. I was like, oh, I don't need to do that. Where the billionaire and his chief investment guy, they're down in, wherever in South America somewhere doing some ayahuasca drug, and they come out while they're tripping. And in their height of their trip, they're thinking about how they can basically take over the pharma world with what they've just found. That there is a shadow when I hear about, Thiel and Musk and certain kinds of VCs. Oh, we're going to take this plant, come up with an analog that we can patent, and then get FDA approval for that. That there's a dark side.
Yeah. It turns out that trickle-down consciousness from the elite at the top down isn't really a thing that works. And I think that has been some people's theory of change, that if we can just go to the people who have the power and use these molecules to wake them up.
It seemed obvious, right?
Right, it seemed obvious. I've got plenty of friends who who have pursued that theory of change, right? Without recognizing that psychedelics are incredibly context and what Betty Eisner called matrix specific. So they are non-specific amplifiers. And so whatever is already occurring inside one's own set and setting of their mind and their environment and the context of like the social, cultural implications of like the waters that they swim in as an individual, that can get amplified through the use of psychedelics. And so if somebody is showing up already with narcissistic tendencies, right, they might get the message, I am God, but fail to recognize that so is everybody else.
Right.
And so you have a lot of cases of this like megalomaniacal sort of outcome of people that, believe that they've got the insight from on high, right? From divine on high. Oh, God has told me, or the medicine told me. The amount of times I've heard that stated from people without recognizing their own internal content is actually like they're actually just speaking to themselves in a real way. And so I think that there was this idea that psychedelics would wake up kind of the elite class, and those people would want to then put their resources towards, improving and coming into right relationship with oneself and one another and our planet, our precious planet. And that has not really panned out as we've seen. So
right, and it feels like that side of this of the psychedelic movement or phenomenon did peak around the time of your 13,000 person conference.
Yeah.
And I don't mean like, oh, every bad thing has a silver lining or whatever, but somehow after the failure of the FDA thing, I felt like a different wave came in, a more positive, less
exuberant, less opportunistic. Yeah. Well, so I like to say that spirit doesn't make any mistakes. And I do. I talk in spiritual reference and with that language because I do perceive these medicines to be soul medicine, and the lineages around them are really rich and point us towards something greater than ourselves. And so for me, and I was, there was an advisory committee hearing in DC in June that I was in DC with the team for, and it was one of the most crushing days of my life to have dedicated so much of my own chi and life force into this mission, and then to really recognize in the June before the August result came back that that we were unlikely to pass. It was incredibly crushing and really demoralizing, and just like a really painful moment for the entire teams involved in this work. And it took me some time to recognize that the FDA not approving MDMA at this time, that Spirit does not make any mistakes, right? That this whole kind of movement was moving at a clip and at a pace and at urgency and expansion. And don't get me wrong, there are patients who can benefit from these medicines who are dying, right? Of suicidality, of depression, of who are unable to manage their PTSD. So I don't want to dismiss or diminish that there is urgency for many people around accessing these transformational medicines. At the same time, the culture around it and the level of extractiveness that had entered into the approach of how to proliferate access to psychedelics was so heightened. And so what this did is it created a correction, right? And we saw a lot of companies go belly up. We saw M&A, roll-ups. We saw just like a lot of things happen, and a lot of the funding dried up. And so what you have now coming into this year's conference, it was a really different energy, just to use the conferences as the timepost. It was a really different energy. Some of the companies were calling themselves the survivors, right? With the acknowledgement that if they were in this just for the money, they wouldn't still be doing this work, because there is no money in this work, and the timelines all got extended, and the funding has really been difficult, but that they're here because they're here for the long haul. So there was a feeling at this event that the people who were left standing were the ones who had their hands in the soil and were here to really do the hard work of making this a thing in the world.
Right. And in that sense, it feels a little bit like, if you think of psychedelics like mycelia, right? If you just consider that sort of that mycelial mushroom approach to life, that the mycelia fueling, or at the heart of this, have kind of fought off an opportunistic infection, and I mean, to get to sort of the second part of what I wanted to talk about with you, it's sort of as if the Wendigo was coming in, or what you call Wendigo. It was the way Native Americans identified this colonial capitalist destructive quality in the white people that came. They thought they had a disease that they called, Wendigo. That it feels a little bit like, even though we lost a lot of support, that it you know what I mean? That there's been a cleansing.
There has been a cleansing. And I would say also there's been a return to the grassroots ideology. And there's also been, which I think is important to name, this changing of the guards generationally that is happening, that I witnessed many times throughout this past conference, right? We just lost Lady Amanda Fielding, who was the head of the Beckley Institute out in the UK, who was kind of the MAPS of Europe, really pursuing research into LSD, did the first brain imaging scans on the effects of psilocybin and LSD. Really incredible woman, right? And so we lost her just weeks before the conference. Every MAPS conference has been done in partnership with Beckley. So we have these kind of elders transitioning outward. And what I saw at the event was this next generation of leadership, and many of them who are younger brown women. And also this centering on the voices of Indigenous leaders inside of our field, right? Which I think is essential. Like, I don't even know how we ever got away from that.
Right.
And so there's this kind of like shift that I believe is really healthy and can be fed and nourished and encouraged to move us back in those ways, with the idea that the best way to access psychedelics is the way that, most people currently access psychedelics outside of commercial or medicalized environments. They access it in peer contexts and with their immediate friend groups or communities. And so how can we nurture smaller grassroots communities that can responsibly and skillfully hold these medicines? And how do we nurture a culture that can hold that is a big question I have.
So, you want to know what's been going on at our sponsor, Everyone's Earth, beyond the Kobe dryer sheets? I'm glad you asked. They're about to release a number of new products that replace plastic crap with biodegradable and regeneratively sourced alternatives. Kobe Laundry Buds. You know those little pellets you can chuck in the laundry machines? but without the polyvinyl skin and phosphates inside. Or change diapers, not just better than the other disposables on your baby's bottom, but they don't create permanent plastic monuments or leach microplastics into the babies themselves. Check out everyone'searth.com for more. Right. I mean, and it feels like a big question in so many areas of culture now that the sort of the central institutions we've used to kind of validate and create trust are failing, whether they're failing the MAGA people who don't believe in, the CDC or the vaccine or the, or the Occupy people who stopped believing in Wall Street as a creator of wealth, or, we now who are looking at, community and ceremony and a spiritual education as better prerequisites for psychedelics use than MD's prescription.
Right, yeah. Which will serve a certain population. Like, we still need to understand the medicalization, but it's always been political science, right? The pursuit of knowledge around psychedelics as an intervention for mental health conditions has been in great part to help shift the public's mindset around the fact that these tools can be healing. So,
right.
Yeah.
But it's just like, the difference between an obstetrician and a doula.
Yeah.
So the doula, are they trained? Do they count? Are they what? Yeah. It's like, well, it's a different thing. It's 1,000 years old.
Yeah. Well, and also just to your point, I have a lot of friends who do, who work in aid and humanitarianism and who do relief work after natural disasters, right? Which we're seeing more and more of. I wish they called it, instead of climate change, I wish they called it increased extreme weather events, because then I think people will be like, wait, that's happening.
Right.
But this idea of building the fabric of mutual aid networks now, ahead of any catastrophes that might happen, right? And it's a similar concept around how do we build a culture that knows how to be good peer supports to one another, that knows how to deeply listen, that knows how to hold space for people who might be going through difficult or challenging experiences. There are principles that we teach. MAP incubated a project called the Zendo Project, which sets up safe space in environments like Burning Man, where people who might be having challenging experiences with psychedelics can come and be sat with a peer who is trained in the 4 principles of how to hold space for somebody. But that training is relevant for holding space for any friend who might be going through any sort of traumatic event inside of their life. So I think for me, it's like, that's the best safeguard that we have in terms of psychedelics not flying off the rails, like culturally, like it has in the past, is cultivating a culture of good peer support. People who know how to do peer support and hold each other through hardship.
And that's holding each other through hardship, to me, is both something that a psychedelic culture needs, but it's something that a psychedelic culture teaches.
Yes.
And I've been not confused so much as it's important to me that I not delude myself as a privileged white Western person. But over the last few years, my mushroom experiences in particular have been challenging. And not like I'm having some bad trip or whatever, but I'm metabolizing something. And it's hard, and I can find certain safe bliss, good spaces in there. And what I keep wondering about when I find that warm spot in the ocean, this is all right, I'm there, is whether me reaching that is self-indulgent, or am I actually metabolizing some portion of the universal trauma?
Well, Doug, only you can answer that. There's a great book by Adrienne Marie Brown called Pleasure Activism, and it's around the role of pleasure and joy being radical acts right? And the need for us to practice those things, lest we allow for the powers that be to rob us of the very marrow of what makes life worth living.
Right.
Right? And so I don't discredit that. And I think we can derive and create any meaning, any kind of meaning out of these experiences. Sure, there's archetypal imprints that are worth exploring as well. There's one's own personal history and narratives that one has around their trauma and their trajectory. But yeah, I think it's really what you make of it.
So you do think it's possible, or I wouldn't even use probable, but you do think it's possible that particularly these small group small groups of people doing mushrooms together who are prepared and are responsible with and to each other, that their work together can energetically connect to a larger field of sort of collective trauma action and.
I do believe it's possible. Absolutely. I think that is, there's so many deep learnings that can come from a group experience like that go beyond one's own personal healing journey, that go into how we approach and how we are with one another, how we support one another, how we accompany one another through this life. And so I think then you take that out, right? And it's one of the big lessons that I really try to drive home with people is Maslow had changed the top of the pyramid of the hierarchy of needs right before he died, right? And it went from self-actualization to self-transcendence, getting beyond one's own, internal process, the like inward spiral that people can go on, just like obsessing about their own journey and narrative, and into transcending that and becoming effective members of their families and communities, right? And I think at their best, once we kind of get through all the noise, psychedelics can help us transcend ourselves, recognize the unique role that we have as part of the whole, and to deeply engage with our families and our communities and our ecologies. I think at its best, that's where psychedelics can lead us.
Right. And that's why it's interesting that it ties into psychology, but goes beyond it. So
definitely.
For me, I was having a really hard patch a couple of years ago and went on a SSRI for a little while. And it was like, wow, this stuff's making me functional. Because it was like a little bit like a root canal or a filling. It was like cement just got put right between me and all that gut horror, anxiety stuff. It's like, well, I'm functional up here and I don't have to worry about what's down there. But it felt so kind of artificial to have that block. And then so I went off that and then tried, for me, I just tried a Stamets stack, which is it's a microdosing mushroom protocol. And it was the opposite effect. And I felt like, and this is what stayed with me to this day and everything I'm doing, it was like, oh no, the object of the game is not to block it, but actually, counterintuitively, to increase the porosity.
Yes.
And I felt what these plant medicines helped me do was metabolize more other people's stuff. You know?
Yeah, and meet people in that, open our compassion, or expand our capacity for compassion.
Right.
Yeah.
But strangely, expanding my capacity for compassion did not add to my burden. It actually it created a porousness where my burden actually was less rather than more, which is so counterintuitive.
Yeah. Oh man, there's something I just wanted to say that I think I just lost. But it was around there's this other layer as well to working with these substances, which is these substances have traditionally been used inside of communities, right? And people who fly down to Peru, parachute in, go through, a 10-day ayahuasca dieta, and then come home, they're missing the immune system of having a community, of having peers that they're actually walking through life with, that are holding them accountable to their homework that might have been assigned to them, that are supporting them in their evolutionary trajectory, right? And so when you isolate the experience, people then start to make the healing about the experience and assign that the reason why they were able to heal was because of this transformational experience, without recognizing that it's actually one's own work on oneself that comes after to integrate and land into a new way of being. That's where the medicine actually is. These just show us the potential pathways to take, but you have to actually then walk on the path. And without having the immune system of community, a lot of people just get lost in the sauce and just go chasing the peak experiences and continue to plumb those depths. And I remember the thing I wanted to say, which is that there's so much about, there's been so much culturally around psychedelics or like, new age philosophy or, the healing or wellness industry or like even biohacking that's been about transcendence or ascension. And for me, the great path right now is actually to descend and to go into the earth and into the soil and really sit with and be with the bigness of the existential dread and pain that so many people, anyone who's awake, alive, and aware today is touching that. And so the more that we expand our capacity to sit with and be inside of that, the more we're going to be able to adapt as we move forward as a species.
I mean, it's great. It encapsulates so much of what I've been working on the last 20, 30 years. There's the California technology ideology I wrote about in my last book, which is all these guys seeing humanity as in the larval stage and they want to get up and out, whether they're using psychedelics or transhuman technology or genomics. It's as if, and it's always so individual. It's this personal thing, So if you were doing psychedelics or you were expanding your brain, you're expanding your brain alone.
Right.
This personal, back to Maslow's old self-actualized self.
Yeah.
But the object of the game, at least right now, it's the opposite. It's how do you get back down into more Terence McKenna's, the greeny engines of reality creation, be in the soil as a living matrix that's connecting us all. But it's also, it's sexuality becomes that way, where it's like, ooh, it's what the last 500 years of Western culture has been designed to work against.
Yeah, the lie of separability that we're constantly, that I think is like a fundamental story that we are somehow separate from nature and each other, has been just something that has defined the last 500 years of Western civilization.
Right. That's why we're so depressed. And then you can take an SSRI, and you take them if you need it. So I'm not saying don't, because you're in this world, but that's what we need to maintain that alienated. How do you stay alive and be that alienated at the same time? So take your SSRI, but then find ways, how do you reconnect to everything and everyone? And this is why I want to go into your work as a doula, and then we can talk about anything. But I've spoken about it to my listeners before. I had this one experience where I ended up being the one in the hospital room of a relative when she was passing. And it was like the moment was coming. And I'm freaking out. First I'm thinking, why me? Why me? Why am I the one there? I put my hand on her hand. I'll just, she can't hear me or anything. I'll just put my hand on there. And if you've done this, you know this. I was like, oh my God, my nervous system has been put into service of this being's passing.
Right.
I don't have to do anything. And I could feel her whole friggin' thing using me to do this let go moment. And I'm weeping and that it's also the greatest feeling of joy I've probably ever had.
Wow.
And of being needed and here for, and I was like, oh, fuck. We're not separate. We're this magic shit. There's something, maybe it's not magic. Maybe it's, we'll have a vagal nervous and, we'll figure it out scientifically. We'll come up with proof of what's happening. Don't worry, scientists.
That is decontextualized without the warm data around
exactly.
it.
We'll find a way to prove it. Recycling is garbage. Literally. You know that just 6% of plastic is recycled? And when it is, they spend so much energy in the process that it's hard to know if it's even worth it. The object of the game is not to recycle plastics and other permanent poisons, but to make nice with the cycles of life, make like a mushroom and learn to compost, transform things into the soil for new life. That's how everyone's earth products work. Fabricate cotton through natural processes, use it in products like Kobe dryer sheets or change diapers, and then compost them into the components for the next living thing. It's not rocket science to get off the planet. It's composting in the name of everyone's earth. But, so what drew you to doula work? Do you have that same experience? And then how does it change the way you move through this world?
Yeah, it's being trained as a death doula when I was 22 to 23 years old has been the most fundamental and I had studied permaculture design before that. And these ontological frameworks, these like fundamental lenses that I view life through have been, the training as a death doula has completely defined my perspective on this life. And this idea of, dying is not something that happens. It's something that you do. And it's something that all of us will do. And when I talk with people, I've done a lot of meditation work. And the reason why I got into this is that during this period of my life, I was present for 5 deaths in 10 months, including the man I was dating, including the man who I was working as a personal assistant to him. He was a grower of mushrooms and cannabis and a maker of chocolates. So it wasn't exactly like the PA work you might anticipate. Yeah. And one of the things that he said to me on his last night alive, he said a few things to me, but one of them is that his entire lifetime of meditation was preparing him for this moment of death, that he finally understood why he invested so much of his time meditating. And so for me, it's that closeness with the true reality that this life is so unbelievably precious and even improbable in the universe when you think about it. And so it's just like being that close and that aware in a full sensorial way to the fact that this life will end. I carry that with me in every day, and it's not this like, negative, dark cloud that I have around me. If anything, it allows me to access what is so precious about life and to like see a tree out my window and have it move me to tears because of the way the light is moving through it, right? And to just like be that in touch with the beauty of existence and the preciousness of existence. So for me, that's really what this work has done. And I became very interested in the ways in which our culture has an extreme mistrust of the mystery and a mistrust of anything that might be categorized as the bad or dark or unknown, right? And so culturally speaking, our relationship to death is one of the biggest areas where this is so pronounced. And so this idea that we can learn to be with shadow, be with darkness, accompany grief and despair, and if we can learn how to grow our capacity to be able to hold life in all of its richness, like I see it as this full spectrum living, right? Where like the depth of the pain I touch is the same distance as like the joy I'm able to touch and the exuberance I'm able to touch. It's like directly correlated, those two depths. And so yeah, it's been my greatest teacher, and I can't say enough about it, but I don't know if there's something more specific you want to touch on.
Death, it's interesting. So after all those kinds of experiences, I don't see the death as the part that's hardest to touch, because it's just, death is a space, I don't even think of it as but as whether it's my nervous system or my compassion, whatever it is opening, I keep coming back to this feeling that we're existing on this very thin membrane over just an ocean of tears. And I've gotten more courage to touch it and go there, but it's so there's so much grief there.
Do you see the beauty in the ability to feel as much as you feel? Do you see it as part of the richness that we get to taste and experience inside of this life?
Sometimes, but I'm also scared of being consumed by it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the befriending of these intense emotions that we have categorized as bad or negative, instead of embracing them as just part of this tapestry of existence that helps us be in touch with like the jugular of life, right? So for me, it's like, yeah, I've had some very intense experiences that have really been hard and marked me in deep and significant ways, but I interpret them as gifts because they've gotten me so much in touch with this preciousness of life. And so I don't see it as such a negative thing to go through an experience like that.
Right. I mean, personally, I'm less concerned about it, although I don't know that I've ever gone through an experience like the death of your baby, you know.
Which I experienced, yeah.
Right, which is, I mean, while, you know.
I was 6 months. Yeah, I was 6 months pregnant, yeah.
I mean, and we don't have to go into the whole thing. You can read about it on her website. But, I mean, it was beyond miscarriage in terms of the kinds of decisions that had to be made. And I'm sure you doulaed your own.
We did. I went to find a map of how to be with this experience of, you know, termination for medical reasons of my unborn baby who had, you know, he would have been born without functional kidneys and may or may not have survived much longer than that. And, you know, if he were to survive, would have had a life of a lot of pain and suffering, right? And so, which is like, I mean, it was super complicated. You know, you're talking about like kidney transplants to a newborn, right? And so, so my partner and I made this decision. And then I went and sought a ritual or a framework or a community or something around this. And all I found was religious content on the internet about how I was a murderer, right? Yeah. And so what we ended up doing is we created what we called a living funeral for an unborn baby. And we invited our friends to come to our home. And I had this insight that my baby's entire experience of life was happening inside of me. And so if I was filled with despair and grief and pain and sadness, he would be feeling that. And so I invited my friends to come over and bliss me out as on his last night alive inside of me. And as a way for them to come and put their hands on him and give him love and energetically send him all the beauty and greatness that this world had to offer, you know. And it's like people sang, people read letters to him, people, you know, massaged my hands and feet and whispered sweet nothings into my ear, you know, and tried to bring me joy. And so it was just this way of like being with, and also it was amazing to recognize how impacted my close community and family were by this loss. Like I hadn't really considered that.
Right. Yeah, that people are coming over. It's not, they're not coming over out of obligation.
They wanted to be there and to be with him and to hold, because they had hopes and dreams about their relationship with him as well. And so it was this really extraordinary experience, and I believe it significantly helped Mike and I to process through just like how extraordinary that loss was of a very wanted baby.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was that was a personal level.
Yeah.
Right. And then are you seeing ways for this to happen, to increase our capacity to do this on a organismic collective level?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's through people being brave and courageous enough to be like, you know what, that way of being in shame, because a lot of people who went through what I went through, women and families, there's so much shame, there's so much stigma. They do not talk about it. They go to work the next day as if nothing happened, right? There's just this like sweep it under the rug, right? And so having the courage to pause and say, you know what, I am going to do this in a different way. And there's just people out there who are experimenting and exploring with ritual and rites of passage and different practices. That's what we need, is 1,000, 10,000 flowers blooming, showing us, illuminating to us the other ways of being in the world. And I think that is happening. I think people are so hungry for it. They're not going to wait around for somebody to come and tell them what to do. They're going to take matters, they are taking matters into their own hands and showing up in these new ways.
And it's interesting how in so many of these, what do we call them, trauma-fraught areas of life now, we're coming up against legal issues.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like ecstasy, who's allowed to prescribe it or not, and legal and registry, and you know the unborn life in my body, who's allowed to have agency over that.
Yeah.
You know,
in 22 states, I would not have been able to do what I did in America and make that choice for myself and my family. So it really brought it home for me into my body, just how real the abortion issue is. Yeah.
Yeah, which then gets to, you know, back to activism and theory of change.
Yeah.
And so, you know, through all of this work, you know, and I've tried to avoid it, you know, certainly in the early rave movement, we were all like, don't be political, you know, because the political, that was the hippies and whatever, and fight the war. We were going to be no agenda. Bliss is the agenda. And like by leaving politics out, we just got co-opted by the worst of the worst. Same with the net, you know. It's like we followed John Barlow, government, stay away, we don't need you. And it's like, oh no, the corporations took over.
Yeah.
Right. So these are political. These are so
Inherently, yeah.
right. So as even a psychedelic, spiritual, indigenous, bottom-up person, how do you activate into a sort of a theory of change without just totally harshing the mellow?
Yeah, I try a bunch of things, you know. I run experiments, right? And I see what works. And I also have this fundamental philosophy that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so I'm constantly keeping an eye on where the culture is and what can be done to shift the culture, even in small ways, right? Even in small pockets of culture. I
like that. That's sort of a corollary to Gramsci, you know, about culture being upstream of politics. It's like culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Yeah, and I mean, I've been part of like, you know, Burning Man culture, which is a whole conversation about the ways that's gone off the rails. But yeah, I mean, I think that one of my fundamental theories and philosophies is around establishing communities of practice, around finding yourself within a circle of peers who are willing to experiment and to try new things, right? So like I run a community of practice of about 20 CEOs in the psychedelic sector. And this community has a mandate, right, which is to generate a shared definition of what we mean by high integrity operations and ethical practices inside of the field, and to generate a set of business best practices that hopefully can be utilized for more people. But inside of this community of practice, there's opportunities to build the relational ecology, to build a field of trust, to which for me, psychedelics are so fundamentally relational, right? So everything for me keeps coming back to what is the quality of the relationships of the individuals involved in anything that we're doing.
Right.
And so with this community of practice, right, we're examining questions about modernity, right, and the kind of established trajectory of business as usual, and what those impacts are on a field like, and in any field of medicine, but especially mental health, where people there's highly vulnerable populations, and especially with substances like psychedelics that have these enormous biocultural histories and are really mysterious and unknowable in significant ways. And so it's the opportunity to invite in inquiry inside of communities that are wanting to engage with that inquiry and willing to try new things with each other and have that kind of peer validation and support to do that.
I want you to understand why these aren't just a silly product that's like a little bit better. It's the guy, Tom, who makes these dryer sheets is thinking about the whole thing. So like the labor that makes it, how they grow the cotton, how they put this together. You know, you can have like a nice, totally organic cotton t-shirt and it says organic and wonderful, but the manufacturing of that thing uses all these chemicals and all this waste and all this crap. They make these things with that perfect little cotton, but then they have a new process to fabricate the cotton so it doesn't put all that crap. And then when you get it, you get this thing that's like not bad. You just put it in the washer and use it as a dryer sheet, and you take it out, you throw it away like with your friggin' compost. It's like and it biodegrades, and it's this kind of perfect cycle of life thing. And that's the difference between this and his change diapers that he's coming out with soon and all these other products, is that they're actually sort of end-to-end part of the regenerative cycle and not just, greenwashed, oh, this is good for the world.
That's beautiful.
But then do you get like involved in like politics?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a political animal, right? So I've occupied Wall Street. I was an anti-war activist for many years. I was at a wall protest in the West Bank back in 2007. So, I mean, I have like a whole, and at MAPS, we have MAPS Israel, which is inherently political effort in Israel and involving Israelis and Palestinians in using MDMA therapy to treat trauma and to try to build and heal. We'll try to heal intergenerational trauma and build peace with each other.
Right,
There's a specific peace building initiative.
Not just to give BB some E.
No, it's not just to. It's not just to like
dose
harsh,
the Knesset.
Yeah, or like mellow the harshness of the situation, but to actually be with the intensity of the trauma that exists inside of our world and the recognition that trauma begets more trauma and hurt people, right? And so can heal people heal people? I don't know. So for me, it's like the things that I've been engaged with over time have been inherently political. I've also like lobbied Congress and done things of that nature.
Right.
I've worked on statewide cannabis initiatives back in 2016 when we had 9 statewide initiatives on the ballot. Very weird celebration. We were at this like party to celebrate the success on election night and slowly realized that Trump was winning. And everyone had gotten like righteously stoned, and then it became a bad trip.
Right.
Right? Because there was that feeling of we've been focused on our single issue without recognizing the sickness inside of our culture. Right? And that was a really big wake-up call for me.
Right. Well, it's interesting, too, because now, I mean, not that you're like leaving MAPS or anything necessarily, but you've expanded your work, right?
Yeah.
To almost applying, and it's an interesting way, at least the way I see it, to make like a mushroom in some ways. How do you apply sort of some of the psychedelic insights or some of the qualities of mycelia to organizations and companies and other things? And what's that kind of look like?
Right. Well, there's this term, the interstitiaries. Are you familiar with this concept? Mm-mm. So we learned about a new organ in the body called the interstitium a couple of years ago. And it's an organ that is like massive. It's like the connective tissue that's not our veins, but that transmits and feeds nutrients throughout our entire system.
That was ignored as just tissue.
It's just tissue.
Because my daughter had endometriosis, which is interstitial, so no doctor knew how to take charge of it, right? Because it's not a thing.
Yeah, right. So there's these a few women, Jen Brandel and Christine Lai, who kind of run with this concept of being interstitiary people, right? And this concept of who are people that are cross-disciplinary, that are connected in with many different kinds of fields of practice and communities of change, and are kind of running between them all, connecting and linking dots. And so I've got this like cosmic switchboard operator kind of role that goes far beyond psychedelics, right? And connects me in with different efforts working on climate, with efforts in AI. I have an AI project right now, not building AI, but really thinking about being generative in terms of near future speculative fictions that are highly scientifically rigorous that can paint us another picture of how AI can be rolled out in our culture that is different from virtually every other image of this near-term future, which they all say is inevitable.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Just started this, I don't know what we call it, a company called And Us, like AI and Us, but it's doing really the same kind of work, looking at generative thinking and, models of engagement with AI that are much closer to like Brian Eno's engagement with technology. What is generative? People don't even really know what generative thinking is.
Right.
They're going to AI for the answer. Like you go to Acid. Here's my question.
Yeah.
Acid, give me the answer.
Right.
And it's like, no, this is the beginning of a long process of iteration, my friend.
And a profound relationship that you can enter into. I've studied a bit with Vanessa Machado de
Oh, yeah, great. We had her on.
I know. I listened to that. She's a very important teacher of mine, and I really revere her and the whole Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures research collaborative that she's part of, and the way that they've worked with meta-relational AIs and the subject-to-subject relationality.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like this question of like, in the times that we are inside of, the world is going to get supremely weird in the coming years. Like our ability to see further into the future. Like I can remember growing up and being like, well, in 5 or 10 years, it'll be approximately like this and I can do these things. And it was all it seemed very obvious how the world was going to be. And now I can't really imagine much beyond 2 years from now. And so I think we're just entering into bizarre times. And so, this question of how can psychedelics accompany our species on this much needed rite of passage as we evolve into being wise enough to wield the kinds of powerful technologies that are existential, that will determine whether or not our species and other life forms get to continue to exist on this planet. Like we are in that moment right now. And so my fear with psychedelics is that people have been confusing the finger for the moon, have been putting too much emphasis on the drugs themselves without the actual work. And my fear is that there's been this idea that we could just inject psychedelics into modernity without recognizing the ways that the constructs of modernity were going to influence and distort psychedelics themselves, right? And I have like this concept that if the more we commercialize and commodify, right, and instrumentalize psychedelics, the shallower and hollower the experiences themselves will become.
And the more we're going to objectify and instrumentalize ourselves.
Right. Yeah. And so for me, it's been this period of like really trying to sound some of the alarm bells inside of my community in psychedelics around the like, hey, these are not for everyone at all. They need to be shown an immense amount of respect. We need to recognize the need to generate a responsible culture around safe use of these substances and skillful uses of these substances so that we can actually get to what they have on offer for us, right? And I think many people like myself got into psychedelics. I thought I was going to be a diplomat like my cousin. I wanted to work for the UN, right? And that's part of how I ended up in Israel and Palestine as a young person. But I saw that actually what we need is a shift in consciousness because we already have everything we need to make the world work for 100% of thriving of all life on our planet, Buckminster Fuller style. But we don't have, there's something in our consciousness that's not allowing us to see it, right? We have these assumptions about human nature, right? That we have to be competitive and that we've got to be dominant over the other and be in control. Otherwise it'll be eat or be eaten kind of mentality. And I think that just completely ignores the biological truths of the ways that even like cells collaborate with one another to make a whole together.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's why, I was thinking in the late 80s, it's funny, I wrote a book called Free Rides, Ways to Get High Without Drugs. And the point of that book was to argue that it's not the drugs that are the big threat to the status quo. It's the states of consciousness that they offer. And there are there are other ways to get
Absolutely.
there. Tantric sex, immersion in nature, sleep deprivation, holotropic breathing, meditation. Although it's hard.
It
Some
can
of
take,
it,
sound and light and
sound
vibration.
baths and vibration. So it's like it's funny. I almost want to go back. It's like if you want to listen to this, go back, and every time you hear the word psychedelics or drugs or something, put in another modality, and it's just as true. I wasn't high when I had my doula like experiences, and or they're available in other ways, and somehow there's something valuable in decentering psychedelics in this conversation.
Well, yeah, and I started saying on stages recently that the future of psychedelics is sobriety. And I don't mean abstinence, but I mean taking a very sober approach to how we work with these substances. Like right now, there's a culture of people who are doing ketamine instead of drinking and who are out there partying. And I'm all for euphoria and celebration.
Yeah.
We need that in our lives as well. But there's such an irresponsibility, right? And I even take some issue with like the culture around microdosing because I see people just missing the point, right? Of just wanting to treat shallowly the symptoms of what their experience is instead of actually go all the way down to the root cause.
Right. The object of the game is to increase our capacity to, confront is the wrong word, but to engage with and metabolize what's going on here together.
Right.
And that's the irony of it is that it's the journey to get there can be really, I hate to use a word like this, it's painful to go there, but there is a joy on the other side of it.
Because it's earned. You worked for it, right? And at Zendo, we say difficult is not always the same as bad, right?
Right.
And so, but we've got this, like, we want things to be easy in our society. We built a frictionless world, right? And
Tech
so anytime
is for that, for convenience.
Right. We built a world of convenience. And so when we're confronted with something that's truly challenging, right, we get so uncomfortable and we want to push it away and we want the shortcut out of it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing I see. I see people thinking of psychedelics as some sort of shortcut to the top. You get the ride to the top of the mountain and now you can just stay there. Well, the trip ends, you're dropped at the bottom of the mountain and you've got to learn how to actually climb it.
Exactly. Or people who are surprised they'll like do a mushroom trip and they're like, well, this isn't fun.
Yeah.
It's like, we didn't say it was going to be fun. This is our work. This is...
Yeah. And like, I also, people are like, oh, I'm about to do this thing and I'm nervous. I'm like, I'm scared. And I'm like, well, that means you're paying attention. If you're not nervous or scared to step into these realms, like you're not understanding the magnitude of what you're engaged with. And like, it's okay to have those feelings.
Right.
Yeah. So I think, the times that we live in right now are sobering, right? And I think having sober, to use that word, approaches to how we work with non-ordinary states to carry the reverence that's required to really meet the depth of the ineffable. Like, that is the only way that psychedelics can accompany us on our rite of passage as a species, right? So that we can become and be returned to stewards of life on this planet.
You think that humans are gonna make it another couple of centuries?
I don't know if I can speculate about that so much. I definitely think a lot about AI. And not only because I have so many friends working at the highest levels inside of AI, also because of a 2016 journey with ayahuasca. That was where I'd never thought about AI a day in my life. That gave me a very confrontational message about what was coming. I think that, will humans make it? Will the planet make it? Like, life will keep lifing. Right? Whether in one form or another, life will keep lifing in the universe. I really don't know, but I do think that things are going to get really hard for large numbers of people sooner than later, especially with climate, especially in global south. So, even right now, being exposed to what I perceive as genocide inside of Gaza, my senses being assaulted by that, all the time, and having this awareness and carrying this like background of just like unbelievable pain and grief. I mean, the level of suffering that I think is coming is so great. And I think that we're going to have to learn how to really navigate a world that has a lot of grief inside of it. And so learning how to accompany and to walk with and to metabolize that is, to me, feels like the project of my own life, right? So that I can be a person who doesn't break in the face of all of that. So I can be a person who has capacity to help and to hold others inside of all of that. Because for me, what gives me hope is the capacity for humans to adapt. And I believe that we can adapt to a dramatically changing world. And so I don't say all of this to be like, oh, I'm so like I existentially dreadful, you know. Right. I actually feel hopeful because so much of the way in which the world is changing is not what people want, right? People want to be in connection with each other. And I think as we get more and more distracted and kind of taken into spaces mediated by technology and online, what's going to keep us whole is our ability to actually feel human. And for me, that's like exciting. It's like, okay, this project of actually feeling fully what it means to be a human being is a way, is like the antidote to our minds being completely, co-opted and manipulated by weaponized algorithms that want to sell our attention to advertisers, right? And so for me, that gives me a lot of hope.
Oh, and that's the very mission of Team Human.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Conscious intervention.
Yeah. And I want psychedelics to be part of the toolkit here. And I believe that is possible, but we have to be scrupulous about not over-assigning too much of the cause of our change onto these substances, right? It's actually inside of our choices that we make that matter the most, and to just remain as agentic beings in these times, and to, it's like to understand that anytime you're inside of a system, like we've worked inside of the FDA, and we believe that we would influence them, well, they're also influencing us, right? And so to have that knowledge as we walk psychedelics out into a culture of the ways that we're hoping to influence culture, but the ways in which the culture might be influencing psychedelics as well. So that is my prayer, is that they can accompany us in these times, but we must be very mindful about how that happens.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Liana Sananda Gillooly.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Be mindful, heartful, and soulful as we move through this next very interesting and weird phase.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real honor to sit with you.
And the best place for people to read is, I guess, your blog at...
Well, I have a website, lianagillooly.com. There's also northstar.guide, which has some of my other work with the companies that I'm doing. And then maps.org for that work.
Yeah, and we'll have all those links and all the names of the people that we've spoken about, like Vanessa, in our show notes. So thanks for being on Team Human. Thank you for being on Team Human. You know where to find us. Go to teamhuman.fm. If you truly love us and have any spare resources, feel free to click on support and support the show. You'll get invites to all my live events and access to our Discord and all sorts of weird, great, fun stuff. Team Human is shot here at MCM Studios. We're supported by Everyone's Earth. And thanks for being on Team Human, our last best hope for peeps.